Sandifer writer, where he does TARDIS Eruditorium and a few other things, and he's had some excellent commentary in the last few months and the last week especially about the Hugo Award and the whole like crazy snafu with the sad puppies and the rabid puppies and everything that came out of that. So we're just here to have some conversation about the Hugos and sort of say like what we think it might mean and what we think the future of the Hugos might be and what went down at the Hugo Awards themselves last Saturday and what any of that had with all. So anyway, hey Phil, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. So we were already, before I put on record, we were already just sort of starting to talk about like the significance of the Hugos this year and what happened with the puppies and what that all means. Maybe you could just give like a real concise sort of history of this fiasco and what it was.
Right. Well,
for any people who have not been following along.
Right. Well, first of all, Hugo Awards are one of the most respected awards in science fiction. They've been around since the 1950s, and they're voted on by a group of fans, anyone who attends a particular sci-fi con, basically. And despite being a fan award, they've just had a really good history of identifying interesting, cool, worth looking at science fiction in prose, on television, in film. They're just a good literary award.
Yeah, absolutely. Any award that you get to share with the likes of Gaiman and Pratchett and stuff is an award that I would be honored to have.
It's not just Gaiman and Pratchett and stuff, though. It's Gaiman, it's Pratchett, it's Asimov, it's Heinlein, it's Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia Butler, it's Doctor Who, it's Star Trek. I mean, it's the history of science fiction this award has gone to. It really does tell the story of the entire genre of science fiction and fantasy in a really good way. And 2 years ago, this author named Larry Correia writes these pulpy books in the Monster Hunter series, they're called. And they are pretty much what you'd expect from a series called Monster Hunter. Correia was basically weirdly jaded about the fact that he had never won a Hugo and started a pretty public campaign to get nominated for one, which hadn't really ever been done in the Hugos. There had just sort of been a gentleman's agreement that people weren't going to openly, publicly campaign for a Hugo. They might discuss it over the bar with their friends about how they're really hoping to get one this year, but no one's putting out blog posts saying, please nominate me for a Hugo. I've been, unjustly denied one all these years. The only actual comparable example was L. Ron Hubbard at the Church of Scientology. Bulk nominated an L. Ron Hubbard novel one year. It's widely suspected. That's right. The only other people who did this, who have ever done this.
That makes sense. Also, probably the only way that any of those books could possibly have been regarded as, good literature by anyone.
He might well have won some short story one in the 1950s before Scientology started. That wouldn't actually surprise me. He was, for all of it, a pretty okay pulpy sci-fi writer of the 1950s. But in any case, Larry Correia, and he for some idiosyncratic reason involving basically mocking the leftist sci-fi establishment that he thought was unjustly denying him his recognition, because he's an overtly conservative writer. Part of the appeal of Monster Hunter is the intricate gun lovers' knowledge of the guns with which these monsters are hunted. So he named this movement to get him on the ballot the Sad Puppies, as sort of a pastiche of leftist sentimentality. So then the next year, he didn't just put himself on the ballot. He didn't succeed in winning a Hugo the first year. So the next year, he didn't just put himself on the ballot. He actually recommended a couple of things in other categories, and one of these things was a short story by a guy who writes under the name Vox Day. And Vox Day is a horrible, horrible human being. Vox Day is, first of all, Vox Day is just sort of deeply politically loathsome. He is fiercely xenophobic. He he's part of what's a broader movement that's called the neo-reactionary movement, that's really associated with like a revolt against the Enlightenment. It's actually like democracy was a bad idea. We need to go back to to almost a kind of monarchy, but a sort of libertarian monarchy, where the monarchs are the ones who just sort of rise to natural power through their aggressiveness and charisma.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some really creepy stuff about the neo-reactionary movement rising out of like the MGTOW boards and stuff, where people are talking about it as if there, you know, it was this sort of like almost like cyberpunk, like underground awareness conspiracy. It's weird because it's talking about like transforming the world. It uses all this revolutionary language, but then it explicitly talks about it in like the reverse of normal, like a darkness, a going back, and instead of like all revolutionary language is normally like going forward or rising up or stuff. It's almost intentionally opposed to the normal way of talking about revolutionary stuff.
Right. What's really key about Vox Day is that he talks about everything in terms of like the imminent fall of Western civilization. That there's this, you know, ancient Western tradition of Western civilization and Christendom. He's one of those people who actually, in all seriousness, uses the word Christendom. And, you know, he did, like, actually in the immediate aftermath of the Hugo Awards, there was this article in Wired that interviewed Vox Day. And he got off on this astonishing tangent about how, you know, basically the end effect and message was the reason, you know, we had to hijack the Hugo Awards was because otherwise Africans will emigrate to Europe and they don't know how to use the toilets properly.
Yeah. Right.
And that's
people in Italy pooping on top of the toilet instead of in the toilet. That was like he wouldn't get off that. He's repeated that in like 3 different interviews about proof for why it's, you know, the end of the world.
Actually, my friend Jack Graham wrote a hilarious piece yesterday in which he mockingly and jestingly analyzed Vox Day's anal fixation for a good It was epically beautiful obscenity and trolling, like the best angry leftist tradition imaginable. And so, you know, first of all, Vox Day's politics are horrible. On top of that, he is a vicious little sadist. He takes visible and tangible delight in upsetting and angering people he doesn't like. He is the sort of person who, if God himself descended and told him that he was wrong about everything and a complete idiot, would declare victory for having gotten God's attention. So he's that God. So, you know, he does things like call a black female science fiction author half savage. He does things like make trolling statements where he says that, you know, the Taliban's the Taliban shooting Malala Yousafzai was completely rational. You know, and carefully leaving out, you know, the under their philosophy, which I oppose and think is morally abhorrent because it's Muslim and not Christian. But, you know, very much a trolling, well, of course, you know, you do things like this sometimes just to upset me. And then just to sort of then laugh at them for not realizing what he really meant. He's just an incredible jerk. And I actually mean incredible jerk. There is a way in which he elevates being a jerk to an art form. You know, I said just moments ago about, you know, Jack's piece being in the angry leftist tradition. I actually have a fundamental respect for really angry, passionate, slightly unhinged political writing. You know, some of my favorite writers are people like William S. Burroughs or Alan Moore, who are really, you know, out there on the edge in their beliefs and philosophies. I have a tremendous respect for that. I have a tremendous respect for the sort of furious energy of Vox Day. It's just that it's so pathetically and uglily wielded.
Right. Well, and I would say I would distinguish because, I mean, Alan Moore's out there, but I mean, and obviously people are going to say, well, it's just because you're on the left and you agree with Alan Moore. I would say that I would distinguish the differences between someone like Alan Moore and Vox Day is not just that Alan Moore and Vox Day are both angry and extreme in their politics or whatever, but that Alan Moore's ends, our goals, are actually noble goals worth striving for, even if you disagree with the methods or the political. And I mean, like, the ideas of, you know, that he's striving for actually for the betterment of the vast majority of humankind, whereas Vox Day, like, openly abhors the vast majority of humankind.
Right. There's actually, you know, for all that I'm talking incredibly furiously about Vox Day, I do have to note I interviewed him in the course of all of this. You know, just almost just for the sheer perverse moment of the, you know, self-identified postmodernist Marxist occultist sitting down, you know, for a friendly chat about literature with Vox Day, just because I almost couldn't resist bringing an artifact that perverse into the world. But I did do this awful and strange thing, and one of the things that emerged out of it, there's a real fundamental aesthetic conflict at the heart of this. Vox Day and the people he likes. One of the authors he put on. I'm going to give you the rest of the bit you need on summarizing a history of it, and then jump back to this.
Right. Sounds good.
Before we forget to actually finish that question. So he nominated this frankly awful human being named Vox Day, and that really upset people because Vox Day is a vicious troll who has really cruelly attacked a number of people in the sci-fi and fantasy community in a pretty unprovoked way. He would, of course, say that it was a completely provoked way, but he's a jerk. And we don't listen to Vox Day. But in any case, what happened as a result of that was that no award, an option that's on the Hugo ballot, specifically if the fans nominate something that the larger portion of fandom thinks is completely insane, actually outplaced Vox Day in the rankings. Fandom, you know, really sort of dug the heel at Vox Day for this sort of stunt of getting promoted onto the Hugo ballot when he's a horrifically racist, sexist, homophobic jerk.
Right.
And so he and the Sad Puppies movement roared back this year with a new trick where they nominated virtually a full slate of 5 nominees in every category. Previously, they had been recommending one story. Here they were nominating enough things that if their nominations went through, they would have every slot in every category. Because the rest of the Hugo voters are just nominating whatever the hell they like. You know, some of them are nominating, you know, weird random Doctor Who books that came out this year that they happened to like, along with 7 other people. You know, they're not doing carefully strategic nominations to try to control the Hugo ballot to make an overall cultural statement about the world. They're just saying, hey, here's the sci-fi I enjoyed this year.
Essentially, they've introduced party politics into what was previously just an open democracy.
Yeah, just an, and I don't want to say an apolitical democracy, because they'd accuse it of having always been politicized. But the thing was, it wasn't party politicized. It was politicized in the sense that sci-fi has always had this progressive tradition that, you know, starts with Mary Shelley, goes through the overtly socialist H.G. Wells, through, you know, feminist writers like Ursula K. Le Guin, Afrofuturist feminist writers like Octavia Butler, and even to the present day with lots of, you know, queer sci-fi site. Yeah, there's this
Margaret Atwood, Scalzi, lots of major figures that have been openly progressive and pushing.
A little moderate for my taste in the progressive tradition.
But this is off the puppies a lot.
Martin in the progressive tradition at that point. No, they're just Democrats. So, you know, I mean, there is this progressive tradition in sci-fi. Actually, one of my favorite moments in the Hugo ceremony this year was Robert Silverberg talking very pointedly. You know, he picks an anecdote from the past of Worldcon because he's offering a prayer for the Hugos in this, you know, very stressful year. And he mentions a guy who pretended to control the weather by looking at the forecast the next day and calling in better weather for the Worldcon. But he picks the example from the 1968 Worldcon in Berkeley, California. No, you don't need to know any other fact than that to know the progressive heritage of science fiction in the Hugos. The 68 Worldcon was in bloody Berkeley. And so, political stuff always got on the ballot. But there was conservative stuff, too. I mean, Robert Heinlein won tons of Hugos. Orson Scott Card won 2 Hugos in a row, which is an unheard of feat for Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead. I don't think anyone seriously argues that those books didn't deserve their Hugos, even if, these days we see some of his later politics and see the seeds and then sort of go, ew, I don't like my teenage self anymore. But, those were great books. But the overt party politics aspect of it was really a turnoff to a lot of people. And then this jerk maneuver of organizing a large enough slate that nothing else is going to get on the ballot. Because what happened was with 10 to 20% of the number of people who were nominating on the ballot, they controlled 66% of what got on the ballot was their choices. And that was just a real cruel slap in the face to the established fandom. To anyone who liked the Hugo Awards, even I, who had never, this was my first year voting in the Hugo Awards. I always just watched them passively and went, I bet those are all good stories. Or, oh, that one sounds actually interesting. I'll read it. I mostly followed the television and comics categories because those are the areas I focus on more in life. But I had respect for them, and just seeing these sad puppies do their business all over them was just awful to watch. And a lot of people felt that way in response this year, especially because Vox Day was really leading the cheerleading for this. There were 2 slates, the Sad Puppies, which a guy named Brad Torgerson took over from Larry Correia, and nominated a nearly full slate in every category.
But it was the Rabid Puppies that really got their slate on the...
Yeah, though it was a collaborative effort. I mean, you do have to realize, for all that, Brad Torgerson insists, the Rabid Puppies are their own thing, he worked with Vox on the slate. It's clear he worked with Vox on the slate. Because, their slates launched on the same day with logos from the same artist.
Right.
This was coordinated. And, Torgerson is providing this sort of moderate front of, oh, isn't it tragic how in the good old days you saw a novel with a spaceship on the cover and you knew you would get dashing tales of daring do, and now you get all these trite allegories about transgender people. Which, I mean, is the awful spectacle of a grown man whining that he can't judge a book by its cover anymore. But all right, we can have this sort of whiny moment. It's still a jerk move to bulk nominate to force other things off the ballot. But then you coordinate with Vox Day, who is overtly doing this now and openly admitting the only reason he is doing this is that he was mad that no award beat him the previous year. He has said, if only they had ranked me 5th instead of putting no award up against me, I would have left them alone, but now I shall crush them. Is basically his actual overt attitude and how he presents this. Because Vox Day desperately wants to be, the villain in some bad 90s cyberpunk novel. So that's, how we got to where we are. And the response to that last weekend was the only Sad Puppy nominee to win was Guardians of the Galaxy. In every other category, something other than the Sad Puppies won. And in 5 categories where the Sad/Rabid Puppies actually did dominate the category, nothing that wasn't on their slate made it to the ballot. No award won, which is an unheard of occurrence. There have been 5 previous no awards in the history of the Hugos, 4 of which were out of an idiosyncratic band of fans who opposed the existence of the Best Dramatic Presentation category because the Hugos were a literary award and not a television award. And a couple of years, they somehow won out over great stuff, like Logan's Run lost a Hugo to no award because of this weird segment of fandom. Which again, the Hugos are a bizarre and wonderful history of sci-fi fandom, for better and for worse at times.
Right, sure. It's quirky and weird. That's great. That's part of being a nerd.
And and this year was was this weird, quirky and weird two-stage contest where, these neo-reactionary zealots won a major victory when they controlled 66% of the nomination slate with 10 to 20% of the actual voters. It was a tremendously effective piece of trolling. It upset everyone it sought out to upset, and that was what it was designed to do. Mm-hmm. It was a crushing victory for the forces of evil, frankly. And then we turned it around and kicked their ass in the final ballot, so that was fun. Round 2 happened, and we...
Yeah, I mean, even Guardians of the Galaxy winning, I mean, you can't take credit for that.
They got ballot and win anyway.
That was just an amazing movie, and everyone knew.
Movies since 1980.
So that was going to win anyway. But the category I hear about where there's some criticism or complaint coming back from the puppies, the one that they ride as like, see, this is why the no award was wrong, is that in the editor category, where there were 2 women nominated, and then the women got a lot of votes and stuff. I mean, that's disingenuous because there were more people voting in general for the Hugos this year than in any previous year. So
anyone who is following someone who openly supports, Roosh V has no right to be complaining about anyone else's feminism.
Right.
I mean, Vox Day is an open supporter of Roosh V. Roosh V is a literal rape advocate.
Yeah.
I don't want to say rape apologist. That suggests that he feels any sense of shame. He is a rape advocate. He fully and literally supports raping women.
Right.
And Vox Day is
and writes books and publishes videos designed to help other people. How
to effectively rape women.
Right.
He is, a loathsome person who Vox Day is great friends with. So, anyone who's supporting Vox Day does not get a moment to talk about anyone else's treatment of them, period. I do not care at that point. All of which said, Terry Weisskopf is someone who, if she had made the ballot through other means, would have been a perfectly worthy winner. The reason I voted no award over her, and a lot of people did, was, quite frankly, our attitude. I think our attitude was, okay, puppies, you've made it political, you've made your point, fine. These awards you've made about politics, so we're gonna make them about politics. Mm-hmm. If you're gonna control 66% of the ballot on the arguments that the Hugo Awards should be about politics, fine. Here's our politics. We hate you. You are terrible people. Go away.
Right.
It was just a complete blunt reaction to how noxiously awful a person Vox Day is. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I like to think that we would do the same against our own, because we did. That's worth noting too. One of the people who won a Hugo was Laura J. Mixon. Who won it on George R. R. Martin's recommendation. She won Best Fan Writer in a little bit of a weird win. Usually that comes from like regular longtime bloggers who, publish a lot over the years. She actually just published one piece, but it was a piece that was a thorough dissection of the actions taken by a woman under a bunch of different, pseudonyms and names over the internet. But basically, she was an open advocate for diversity and progressive science fiction. But she was also always constantly vicious and looking to start fights with people who either she didn't like how much they promoted her work, which she didn't always do under the same name. She was abusing people.
Right.
She kind of carefully kept those identities distinct so she wouldn't have to pay any consequences for that. And she was just terribly cruel to people, a lot, in a really misleading way that involved a lot of deception. And Mixon took a lot of reports of that, correlated them, and really brought the problem to light and made it so that a lot of people who had been following her thinking that she was I'm going to pause for a moment because my cat's about to walk in front of the camera. Yes, not cat on dog. That will lead to great harmony in the house. Good job. So Nixon wrote this expose correlating all of these accounts, and it really knocked a lot of people who, thought that maybe she was a little bit of a loudmouth, but it was all in the sort of good tradition of angry critique, who were sort of on the fence of that when, okay, no, actually, she's a horrible person.
Right.
She's really doing some nasty, nasty stuff, and we just don't want to be associated with her. I don't want to say even this is like some she's irredeemable, horrible person shunning. It was just, people went, okay, I'm not going to be reblogging her.
Right.
And admittedly, there were people who took that too far because she was a woman on the internet and sent her the slew of rape threats that every woman on the internet, regardless of politics, gets when people are angry at them.
Right.
I don't want to pretend that it's only women on the left who get treated like that, or that people on the left never do that. But in any case, we gave Nixon the Hugo for that.
Right.
We gave Nixon the Hugo for exposing very much one of her own. She also made a point in her acceptance speech to give a shout out to Black Lives Matter. I mean, she very overtly positioned her acceptance speech in the progressive tradition while simultaneously calling out one of our really bad actors. Mm-hmm. So privately, I'm pretty confident that if, requires hate, the pen name that this woman went under, which, is about as good a pen name as Vox Day when you get down to it. I like to think that if she had organized the, whatever puppies, fandom would have had the same reaction coming from that. I genuinely do believe that. But there very much was an element of, if you are going to try to take this thing that we love away from us so that you can make points about how homosexuality is a birth defect and women shouldn't get the vote, we're not going to let you.
Right.
Or at least we are going to find the loudest way to register our complete and utter disapproval.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as you look at the numbers, you see that the people who really sided with your key argument, which is the no award across the whole slate, were pretty small in number.
Yeah,
the people who voted with the puppies were pretty small in number, and then the people who were in the middle who voted down the 5 no awards were pretty large in number, significant in number. Which to me, what that says is that a fair number of the people who voted no award on those 5 awards weren't necessarily identifying themselves as strong leftists as much as they were pushing back against the politicization of the awards from the puppies. And in other words, I think that Vox Day alienated people who otherwise honestly couldn't care whether or not they were voting for a Larry Correa or a Jim Butcher or a Scalzi or someone else. I think that it was more that they said, we don't like you dominating the slates and using these tactics and being such an asshole about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly was a strong reaction on the progressive left of sci-fi fandom, and I was a vocal part of that reaction. I wrote a sprawling, like 16,000 word invective / analysis of Vox Day and his work called "Guided by the Beauty of Their Weapons." That was, this very big, angry piece on Vox Day. I mean, I picked that fight back home. I really wanted to stand up to not just the hijacking of the awards, but the hijacking of it for this, frankly, fascist ideology. Mm-hmm. It's, in a weird sort of way, I respect Vox as the extremist that he is, because I do have a love of a certain style of extremism. That's actually part of why I really love science fiction, is I think the tools of science fiction and fantasy are really well suited to pushing ideas to their breaking.
Right.
And I think that's a valuable and interesting thing to do. I think that in a world where we seem to slowly be cooking ourselves to death, maybe the status quo is totally unacceptable.
Right.
You know, that
maybe incremental change is not good enough.
Or even, not only maybe is incremental change not good enough, but an almost, I'm willing to I think we really have to take seriously, if not fully embrace, the the outright nihilist possibility that human civilization and human society are simply not fit for purpose. That if we drive ourselves extinct, we bloody well deserve it. You know, that we as the seeming sole guardians of this thing called consciousness that we like to celebrate in art and celebrate with this self-valorizing culture, if we can't even keep from cooking the planet, we didn't deserve it.
Right.
We didn't. Consciousness is a failure if the only species to try it drives themselves extinct with their arrogance.
Right. Well, and drives themselves extinct in a, evolutionarily speaking, relatively short span of time.
Yeah, I mean, we really blew it fast.
We really did.
I mean, we're literally in the midst of what people are calling the Anthropocene extinction. You know, in the tradition of like the Holocene extinction and the extinction that killed the dinosaurs, the extinction we are causing right now. Given that, why on earth do we assume that our civilization and what we have built even deserves to be here? I think we have to take seriously that possibility, even if we do not fully embrace it. You know, even if we do decide, no, it's still worth fighting for, we shouldn't just, you know, voluntarily go extinct and let the pandas have it go. Though I don't rule out letting the pandas have it go. That seems possibly preferable. You know, I really do encourage radical thinking. Certainly I have the strong sense that my, you know, dog and my cats have a better sense of how to live in the world than I do. So, you know, there is, so I very much stand on an sort of extreme left position that is as extreme as Vox's neo-reactionary right-wing position. And I welcome the hatred of those on the right who think I shouldn't exist because of them. You know, all right. I don't identify as a postmodernist Marxist occultist in ignorance of the sort of social consequences of doing so.
Right.
They're part of the joke, actually. But so I felt it important to take a sort of equal and opposite stand of, if the Hugo Awards are going to be hijacked by fascists, they no longer deserve to exist. Awards that let this happen to them don't get to exist this year. Try again next year. You know,
in essence, George R. Martin said that, you know, a no award vote across the slate would be the end of the Hugos. In essence, you're fine with that. You're like, okay, if it's the end of the Hugos don't deserve to exist.
I don't think it would be the end of the Hugos. I think that there is a 50-year-old institutions don't die in 1 year. They don't. There's a longer rot that sets in, and the Hugos have certainly lost some mainstream appeal, but that's changes in patterns of publishing. Everyone's hemorrhaging like that. You know, there's no.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's relative in terms of the amount of appeal too, because you know, to various periods in the last century, and sci-fi fantasy in general is not a respected genre. Period. So it's kind of. So what does it mean for the Hugos to be slightly more or less regarded publicly? What's that relevant to? How does that relate to the genre?
It's gone through phases. When I was teaching, you know, and I did a, you know, intro to fiction class and got a short story and, you know, got to put together a short story anthology from this custom press. You know, there were Bradbury and Asimov stories on the offering if I wanted to teach them. That was sort of all there was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were like the three sci-fi writers. I think, you know, you got Le Guin, Butler, Asimov, and Bradbury. Those were sort of your four. You know, it was very much a cursory glance, much like you got, you know, an Agatha Christie and a Raymond Chandler for the detective story. So, yeah, there's been sort of shifts in the literary respectability of sci-fi, and there's been a degree to which it's been a brand. Plenty of classic pieces of literature could have been published as fantasy movies. Let's not kid ourselves about Beowulf. So, there is, it's not always that sci-fi has been part of the sort of literary gutter, but equally, the Hugos are a genre subset of a larger category that, the Harry Potter books get nominated for Hugos. I don't think Twilight did, but that says more about the gender makeup of Worldcon than it does about their judgment of its quality, frankly. If this weren't a historically male fandom with lots of people who look like me, there's lots of white guys in this fandom. In the lead up to the Hugo Awards, for me, a moment that touched my heart was when a white man with a beard won an award for collecting things. This was a thing that actually happened in the lead up to the Hugo. And you just look at that and go, sci-fi fandom. We are what we are to this day. I celebrate the fact that there was also a black woman on stage giving out the Hugos. I celebrate the fact that the 2 prose Hugos that did go out went to works that had been published in translation, which is, a real victory for diversity, quite frankly. I celebrate those moments of diversity, but I smile lovingly at a white guy with a beard winning an award for collecting things. That is sure as hell the fandom I grew up in. So, it's
So I'd like to maybe turn for a second and let's talk about the puppies are a thing that's happened at the Hugos, but is there a bigger moment happening? Is this, some people have compared the puppies to Gamergate, and certainly a lot of the people who are in the puppies have reached out to and appealed to Gamergate for common cause. Is there something bigger going on in, nerd geek subcultures generally, where this sort of backlash, this sort of ressentiment is sort of making a resurgence in our time? What's going on?
Well, first of all, on a very basic factual level, Vox Day was involved in Gamergate from the earliest days. So there's literally one of the same people behind it. Even before it was coined Gamergate, when it was just this blog post that got thrown up about Zoe Quinn's sex life and a bunch of angry men who wanted to shame her for cheating on her boyfriend. Vox Day was there and, really wanting to chase this down and use it as a moment to rebel against the social justice warriors in video gaming, as he viewed it. He was there in the earliest days. So it's literally the same people doing this, at least on some level. How many of the sad puppies are also Gamergate supporters? How many of the Rabid Puppies? Well, the Rabid Puppies probably are. Vox Day actually runs a group he tongue-in-cheek calls the Vile Faceless Minions. He literally has, a group of 440 people who have committed to doing things like buying Worldcon memberships for $40 and voting in awards if he tells them to. His own little private flash mob. So they are one category and certainly are, running accounts in support of Gamergate as well. I have zero doubt that Vox Day has told his Vile Faceless Minions, again, literally their name, to, set up set up 4 or 5 Twitter accounts and tweet regularly about Gamergate to make, to inflate the numbers. So there are, degrees to which they are literally the same people. The puppies and the Hugos are a little weirder because you get the, odd spectacle of Gamergate going straight up against George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
And there's a real, what moment to that? But equally, the trick is Gamergate legitimizes itself there. for those in the know, for those who followed Gamergate and have followed George R.R. Martin and sort of react with the stunned horror of what? Who see that for the perverse story that it is, that it's, 440 people who did a good job of making the news this week. There's a sort of rueful, almost funny perversity to it. But then you remember that, therefore a lot of people think that, Gamergate is a vaguely legitimate movement and not a let's pin a scarlet letter on it.
Right.
So, there is an overlap there. There is that consequence of it. But I think there is also a larger aspect to it, though it's a continual aspect. I mean, there's no historical moment where there isn't a tendency for a reactionary backlash over whatever social change is going on right now. And even as we slowly bake, we are doing a better job of recognizing and treating certain historically oppressed populations with more dignity. Mm-hmm. We're doing a vaguely okay job with that, even as we slowly kill ourselves. And I guess that's worth celebrating sometimes in the midst of your, fundamental nihilist depression about the inevitable extinction of humanity. But that's the social change of our era, and there's the same reactionary crap that there always is. That's why I compare them to fascism, because they are, our generation's version of that reactionary violence. Yeah. It usually loses. That is the sort of one bright side, is that reactionary mob is usually good at causing some awful devastation and then losing in the long run. Sometimes it is really genuinely horrifically awful, but even the Nazis lost.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was going to say. Is the scary thing is that in the interim a lot of damage can be done. What I see is particularly perverse about this, and what this trend I see in that is in Gamergate and Puppies, but it goes beyond that. I mean, I think it's really ultimately why Trump is trending in the news. I think it's why the Tea Party had its moments. Why
Trump historical appeal of the know nothings like no one else.
why there's Confederate flag rallies happening right now is I think that there's this sort of perverse twist that's happened, which I'm not saying it's unprecedented, but I think it's certainly occurring now in a unique way, which is that the people of privilege and power, people who essentially have had everything pretty well granted to them, have co-opted the language of victimization and marginalization and use it. So I mean, it's, oh no, Christians are persecuted, oh no, the gamer geeks are persecuted, oh no, conservative sci-fi writers are persecuted, oh no, everyone is claiming the marginal position and the marginal stance. No one here in this argument is saying for the establishment. Everyone is saying we're arguing from that.
I do want to point out something in defense of, of the sad and rabid puppies here, actually, though, because in a world that is as much an oligarchy and plutocracy as ours is, everyone is marginalized. We're all on the bottom. What's happening is a really effective tactic of turning two separately oppressed populations against each other by telling, people who are genuinely recognizing, wait a moment, that, my living conditions are way below those of my parents. And theirs seem lower than their parents before them. There's been this sort of long time term decline in my community. This real loss of dignity in a lot of ways. Which is happening to all of us, as jobs get squeezed out to further and further from a living wage, so that we're working more and more hours to not be able to afford the rent. We all kind of recognize that climate change is happening and we'd rather stop it, but we don't have the power to, and the people who do seem to prefer not to stop it. As we look at all of these things that are happening in a world where power is increasingly concentrating among a economic oligarchy, of course everyone is angry. Of course everyone has the anger of victimization and the oppressed. The problem is there's a large group of people who are being lied to about who their oppressors are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of people who are being told by the deliberately failing schools, told by the deliberately bought out media, told by source after source that the reason they're struggling is because of these other people. You should be angry at them. And it's
the Fox News effect that, you know, is often parodied of, you know, the CEO takes 11 of the 12 cookies on the plate and then points at the union guy and says, he wants your cookie, you know.
Which is a particularly, you know, Fox News is a particularly virulent manifestation of it. It's worth noting that Vox Day's real name is Theodore Beale. His father is Robert Beale, a former organizer for Pat Robertson. Sorry, I wouldn't want to get my right-wing nut job misnamed Pat wrong. Former fundraiser for Pat Robertson and now jailed federal tax protester because he hid a couple $1 million of his computer company's of his salary as CEO of a computer company to avoid paying taxes on them, and then threatened the life of the federal judge trying him. And you know, Theodore Beale lives in Europe, widely speculated because he doesn't, you know, because he has some tax problems of his own from daddy's money. And, you know, spends his trust fund on a fringe science fiction press. That's who Theodore Beale is he, you know, leads the oppressed, leads the masses of the oppressed. Another rich conservative American.
Right.
Who, whether or not...
Rich conservative expat American, doesn't he live?
Yes, he lives in Europe. Switzerland, as I understand it.
Which is so hilarious.
Well, what's really great, my favorite thing about this, actually, Vox Day is not actually right. This he identifies publicly as mixed race, Hispanic, Native American. I don't know the actual, you know, percentages of his genetic makeup. I strongly suspect that he has gone through his life enjoying the fruits of white privilege, whatever his ancestral background may have been. But as a matter of literal fact, he is, he is mixed race, Hispanic, Native American. Mm-hmm. He is adamantly in favor that races should stick to their own homeland. You know, he has said things like, you know, Africa for the Africans, Asia for the Asians, France for the French, Germans for the Germans. Note that we like narrow down to countries when we get to the white part of the world.
Right.
But the hilarious thing is he says this while being a Mexican Native American living in Italy.
It's like...
and like his argument is, yes, but I have assimilated. Which, you know, yeah, okay, you're always the magical exception. We get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like living embodiment of American exceptionalism. You're an exception to bloody everything.
It's like the classic, white supremacist, Aryan believer who's, brown hair, brown eye, doesn't fit their own ideal. How do you feel about what actually happened at the awards? Like, it wasn't what you asked for. You asked for no awards on the whole slate, but how do you feel about the results?
Schadenfreude is fun. I feel outright victory. For all that it wasn't the result I voted for, I watched the Hugo Awards, and they were a beautiful celebration of the heritage of science fiction. And science fiction fandom with frequent loving nods toward the progressive tradition. It was a wonderful night to be a progressive science fiction fan.
Excellent. It seems like everyone post the Hugos was claiming victory. Everyone was claiming victory. As you said, it seemed like, Vox Day would claim victory no matter what was the case. But how much do you think there's like confirmation bias happening? How much do you think people are looking at and reading this like a Rorschach drawing and seeing what they want to see?
The puppies did win in April. So in that regard, everyone is kind of right, but the puppies' victory wasn't last week. The puppies' victory was not at the Hugo ceremony. Their victory was in April. It happened. It was crushing, humiliating, and anguishing to live through. Last weekend was our punchback. Plain and simple. They didn't win last weekend. We did. We didn't win April. They did.
Mm-hmm. So this term SJW, which means social justice warrior, has gained currency not just in the puppies movement. In fact, I don't think I think it even precedes the Gamergate movement. It's kind of seemed to be circling around in the internet for a little while now. What the hell is going on with that? I mean, how does one get social justice and turn that into a negative somehow and then still claim the moral high ground?
It's a weird one, especially because unlike a lot of slurs, it doesn't actually sound like a bad thing. What would its opposite be? Antisocial injustice wimp?
Right.
But what's happened is social justice became a diffusely defined theoretical term within leftist discourse. And then got sort of grabbed by the right as a slur against. They did this really weird link where they said, social justice is just a new name for cultural Marxism, by which they meant the Frankfurt School of Marxism in Germany, which isn't even a Marxist school I like very much. I'm a situationist. They were French. But they this weird argument that social justice was this heritage of this weird Marxist academic movement that secretly then took over academia. And it is true that Frankfurt School Marxists are read a lot in English departments. As someone who went through an English department, if I wanted to read a lot of Theodor Adorno, I had that option. I didn't take it. He's pretty lousy. But so social justice sort of got tinged as a code, as a sort of Illuminati code word, frankly. That's the sort of argument that's being made against social justice. Really, social justice warriors should start putting pyramids and, occluded eyes on everything. That's the next move for us. It sort of got picked up as a slur that way, and now it gets used as actually Vox Day has a book coming out tomorrow called SJWs Always Lie, which is his big and loathsome mantra, which basically by lie he means have worldviews more complex than white culture is best culture. But it's an innovative usage of the word lie on Vox's part.
Yeah, right. It's one of those hilarious titles and / premises that are
right, like and cool. Democrats are the real Nazis now, or whatever she called her last book.
Right. I mean, it's Godwin's Law-esque in that it's like it's very premise is self-refuting, self-defeating. Like it can't be true by its very nature, because all I have to do is say, yeah, social justice warriors always lie, and then boom, false. Logically, it isn't sustainable in any possible way. It's just beyond hyperbolic. It's like an extreme fringe of hyperbole.
Yeah, I'm genuinely torn, because apparently he talks about me in the book, and I'm torn between my adamant desire not to give him any money and my narcissism on this one.
There you go. Well, you have to torrent it or something.
If it goes up, I mean, he's a fringe enough writer that frankly no one cares. No one cares on pirate sites like they do, China Mieville, and John Scalzi, and the leftists. We get on the torrent sites. He doesn't. I'm on torrent sites.
Nice. So let's for a second, one of the things that the puppies constantly go on about is how this is all about trying to get politics out of it. It should just all be about art and aesthetics. That the award should be about how good the writing is, not about the politics of the author. Blah 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 blah. And you push back on that really well, talking about the relevance of politics to art and aesthetics. I mean, I think there's a lot of different arguments one can make. I think it's stupid to say that art and aesthetics are somehow magically separate from politics. But if you had to summarize in a sort of brief way, why are politics relevant to arts and aesthetics?
Because art is an attempt to do something in the world. It is always an attempt to change the world in some way, even if just how people talk about and think about things. And there's no such thing as trying to change the world apolitically. It may or may not be part of, party politics, a sort of crass, fallen, and ultimately irrelevant form of politics that thinks Donald Trump matters more than a year before any election in which he might assume a position of power. It may or may not be political in that sort of bland sense, but all art is about the world in which it's made. And that's political. That's fundamentally political. The other take, and you can splice these together freely, is politics are aesthetic. At the end of the day, what we are politically invested in is in part a question of what we find beautiful and worthwhile in the world. I find new, strange, different things valuable and worthwhile. I want more diversity, even not because I think that it's going to be a harmonious state with no tension and strife. I fully accept the material reality that integrating neighborhoods causes some social disruption and some, high tempers at times. I think those are worthwhile. I think being confronted by people who aren't like you and working through your surprise and anger and, confusion at that is an important thing to do. That's an aesthetic judgment on my part, every bit as much as the judgment traditional Christian society must be protected at all costs is an aesthetic judgment for Vox Day.
Right.
Politics are aesthetics. There's no way to separate them. They're not the whole of aesthetics. There's more to aesthetics than just politics, but that politics are absolutely a part of aesthetics.
That's excellent. That's a really great way of framing that. And I think that's just, I don't think it's a refutable argument. We are ultimately...
To be fair, Vox Day doesn't try to refute it. Vox Day's argument is this much weirder one that somehow, the progressive sci-fi tradition that held the 1968 Worldcon in Berkeley has been being secretive about its political leanings. Vox Day's argument is this thing you've been doing openly. We've caught you doing it.
It's so secret.
We've foiled your secret public plot.
The secret plot about which you have been nonstop writing books and pamphlets and essays and things about because you're so secretive.
Right, which is another reason I sort of just own the Marxist, the postmodernist Marxist occultists. Is, why not make it clear who hates me?
Right. Nice. All right, and a last one. Let's get idealistic for a second. What is sci-fi for? What is its higher purpose? I mean, does it exist? Is there something behind sci-fi as a genre for what it should be for? Why people should do sci-fi?
For a long time, there was this argument about sci-fi's value that it was the sort of prediction of technology. The value of sci-fi was that it was how we were thinking out what we were going to do in the future. And that was a really key part of the Isaac Asimov moment of sci-fi, where we're writing these sort of logic problems about robots.
Right.
And sort of playing them out to explore what this robotic technology we're going to have someday is going to do. And that kind of sci-fi took a hit when it wrongly predicted that space travel was going to be the future, when it turned out that space is impossibly big and vast, and even if there are aliens, they're uselessly far away from us. And simultaneously, when it wrongly predicted space and missed the internet entirely.
Mm-hmm.
That was a sort of crisis of conscience for one vision of what sci-fi was, that said it was about predicting the future. But they were almost right. You know, I don't want to say sci-fi is about predicting the future in that sort of crass technological sense.
Yeah. I mean, everyone can point to plenty of examples of, you know, tricarders and Star Trek and Palm Pilots and cell phones and stuff. Everyone can point to ways in which sci-fi prefigures technological advancement, but
missed. And the thing is, I think those matter about equally little. You know, the Romans didn't need sci-fi to invent aqueducts.
Right.
You know,
right.
we got through millennia of technological innovations without trying to predict them with fiction 50 years earlier.
Right.
This doesn't actually seem to be a terribly useful process. But we've always imagined things other than ourselves. We've always told stories and tried to imagine situations that we couldn't actually experience. We have always tried to confront the horror and beauty of the unimaginable, whether it be God or death. We've always tried to figure it out. And sci-fi is a profound tool for doing that, in part because it recognizes that one of the unimaginable things is the future.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can't actually imagine tomorrow. Both, you know, we can make guesses maybe, but we kind of all know constantly that, you know, the family member's cancer diagnosis or the pet that gets sick or the job that you lose is waiting out there in one of those tomorrows for us. As are, you know, the friend we haven't met yet, the children we might not have had yet, all of these possibly good things. But there's always this sense of, you know, these world-changing events that are going to happen that we can't actually foresee. And science fiction is a way of thinking about that. Science fiction is a way of imagining a world without us, which is something we are guaranteed is going to exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a world without us is important because it's coming for all of us. A world without us is coming for all of us. And sci-fi engages with the promise of that, the way in which, you know, maybe this world without us is going to be a better, fairer, more beautiful world. Maybe we can work to fix some of the awful, ugly brutality going on outside our window constantly. And it's a source of horror, you know, that it's all going to end someday. And sci-fi lets us play with both of those. It's a way of thinking completely outside the box of reality.
I like it. In a way, it's amazing for all that this, you know, it trended briefly on Twitter, and for all that this stuff is, you know, made news and seemed like a big deal. It's amazing, really, how incredibly small this pond is. I mean, we're talking about, as you said, I don't know, 400-ish people on the Puppies side, and small groups of people who know each other and who have delusions of grandeur way beyond the...
And it's important to note, one thing that happened with the Puppies was that they identified a structural flaw with the Hugo ballot. You know, that fact that an organized slate can dominate it artificially is, you know, it's a structural flaw in the Hugo ballot, much like how we can end up with President Bush when President Gore won more votes, is, you know, fundamental structural problem of that democracy. Nomination reform passed at Worldcon this year. It needs to be ratified next year, but as of 2017, the slate ain't gonna fly anymore. That tactic won't work.
How is the nomination reform intended to work? What does that do?
What it does is you get between up to 5 nominations, and if you use all 5, your 1 point of nomination gets split as 0.2 nominations for all 5 of them. But then what they do is start eliminating works based on the least nominations. And if a work vanishes off your ballot, your points redistribute out. So what happens is slates, because all of their works drop out at the same time, get nullified. On the other hand, the Puppies, you know, line that voting no award is burning the awards down and a violation of everything the Hugos stand for. No, it wasn't. It was literally right there on the ballot. I saw it when I clicked on it.
Yeah, and always has been. It's not like they put it there this year, you know.
And frankly, neither are the changes to the voting structure, which don't take effect next year. The puppies are still going to clog the ballot next year. It is going to be a hell of a fight within sci-fi fandom to get our works on the ballot without resorting to the same obnoxious slate tactics that they are.
Right.
What is often the tragic problem and sort of noble failing of the left is our astonishing skill at building a circular firing squad. I mean, we can get a circular firing squad like nobody's business. We can get one of those up and running like the right can get a 440-person strong hate mob. We're great at it. And that, I think there are going to be some idiots on the left, and I think it's an idiotic tactic. A slate on the left isn't going to work. It's not even going to make the ballot because too many people on the left hate the slates, first of all. The no award vote against Vox Day relied on a body of people who opposed the slates as much as they opposed the politics.
Right.
That was a coalition victory. It wasn't, just a victory for the anarchist bomb throwers on the left. And we'll lose the coalition if we do slates. One of the more obnoxious things about Vox Day is that he treats being a jerk like some game of, four-dimensional chess. I'm playing Calvin Ball. I just want a fun award, whatever it takes. I will be absolutely ruthless in pursuit of having a fun conversation about sci-fi. That's my hardline extremism. One thing that's very cool about the Hugos is it costs you $40 to vote in them to join this sci-fi convention as a supporting member, but what you get as part of your supporting membership is what's called the Hugo Pact. You basically get ebook versions of every nominee in a category where that's remotely sensible. You don't get, free copies of the television episodes and the movies, basically. But everything else you get, if it's editor, you'll get at least like a sort of sizzle reel of their work. If it's short story, you'll get the short story. If it's novel, you'll get an excerpt of most of the novels. You get this, frankly, more than worth $40 collection of great sci-fi fantasy literature, assuming it wasn't all picked by the puppies. The value does kind of drop on year's Vox Day control. But, on a normal year, joining and voting in the Hugos is just a great way to buy a sort of humble sci-fi bundle, to use the language of, that great indie gaming sales site that goes on. Buy a Hugo membership, get $40 worth of great literature, which does make choosing easier. Voting you can do as a casual fan, but unfortunately the casual fans really need to get involved in nominating this year.
Mm-hmm. All right, Phil, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about the Hugos with me.
This was fun. I had a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a really good time with it, and I will
When it's up and ready, and I'll link to it.
Yeah, I'll definitely be keeping in touch with you on Twitter, online as well, and I will be being active in the Hugo conversation next year for sure. I was not prepared for it this year to blow up this way.
When you get your nomination ballot together, hit me up with it, and a few sentences about why you picked things, and I will run that ballot happily.
Great, awesome. Take care.